know that you've had a few warnings in terms of us kicking off, and as it is 2 p.m. now, we are going to start now. I know there's a few students who probably will join us in the next few minutes, but that's absolutely fine. But we know we promised you a 2 p.m. start, so that's what we're going to do. I know that quite a lot of the students who have been on the line so far, so Chinmay, you're always on in good time, and I love seeing your name pop up there. So there's a few of you who've been on here for a few minutes, so well done for joining us early. And thank you for kind of answering these questions that are in the poll, which you can see in front of you now as you dial in. So what we wanted to do with that is just get a bit of an idea before the beginning of the session on a few kind of top line questions before we kick off the session. But before that, I'm sure a few of you might have seen my face before on some of these webinars, but I'm Ellie from Pathway CTM, and I know that there's another few kind of familiar faces who will introduce themselves throughout the session, and some special guests for today. But you have got Ellie here, and I know you heard from Catherine just now from our side. So we're here, and if you have any questions throughout, then Catherine and I are kind of on hand to help support you through those. So I'll tell you how to do that in a second. But really, first and foremost is just thank you and well done again for joining us for this session. We're always so impressed by the fact that you're using your time while you're at home, and things can be a little bit more challenging, to your advantage to learn a little bit more about your future and to potential kind of journeys, skills of other people who are that little bit further ahead, to give you some tips and advice in terms of different career paths and different brands that you can work for. I know that the NHS is an amazing brand, and we always hear so many people from our students letting us know they want to work in the NHS and as part of the NHS. So I'm really unsurprised to see that for the majority of that first question, we saw 100% of students saying yes to, are you interested in working for the NHS? So that's great to hear, and you're definitely in the right place to hear a little bit more about that. What's also really interesting is that I've got a bit of a split of kind of 30% of the students interested in kind of like technology, 30% IT, and then quite a lot, 60% of, then 40% of the students saying they're not really sure. That's absolutely fine. So you're really in the right place to understand a little bit more today around whether those kind of elements are right for you, and obviously we'll be touching on wider kind of NHS roles. So you're still in the right place to learn a little bit more about what's out there. And we've got 50% of students looking to apply to an apprenticeship this year, so that's really good to know. So we've got some year 12s on the line, we've got some year 13s or year 11s who are really looking to go to kind of an apprenticeship in the NHS this year. So that's really exciting to learn a little bit more today. So thank you so much to kind of getting back to us on those poll questions, and we'll really be able to look at those answers and get really good idea of who's on the call today. So that's brilliant. Thank you so much for that. So before we kind of dive into the content and I hand over to the experts who know a lot more than I do around the NHS and kind of tech and IT specifically, what I want to do is make sure that for any of you who might not know my face, who might not know how these work, then how you can get the most out of today's session, because ultimately we're here for you. We're here to make sure that you get the most out of it today. So the way you can get the most out of it is by really interacting with us, asking any questions, asking our special guests who are going to introduce themselves any questions at all, raising your hand, getting involved. That's what we love to see. Even you being here is impressive, but why not go further and ask a few questions, make a few comments, because you can do that through this Zoom function which we're on today for the webinar. So how do you do that? There's two main ways you can do that on the Zoom webinar. That's through the chat box. So as you can see, Catherine's put a little hello and a here in the chat box, so you can kind of get back to her or write any comments throughout. Definitely do that. But really what's really important is this Q&A box, which you should all see on your screen as well. You can write a question in there at any time throughout the session. There's no bad time, there's no bad question, and just go ahead and do it, because then you're going to get more out today, and you can get more of these experts who know about helping you towards that apprenticeship in the NHS, which you all seem to be after, whether it's this year or next year. So do write in any questions into the Q&A box. Catherine and I have our eye on it the whole time, so we'll just make sure that your question is answered. You can do it anonymously, you can put your name on it, absolutely fine, whatever works for you, but just ask as many questions as possible. We've seen some really great ones throughout the NHS webinar series, and we know we'll see some more today, so no pressure. So then that's how you kind of communicate with us. In terms of a little bit of an agenda, then I know that there's no one better than himself, but Roshane's going to give a little bit of an introduction to himself and what he does. You've also got Rob here, who's here to kind of answer any questions from more of a general apprenticeship side, who any of you who were on our session a few weeks ago gave us a really good broad understanding of what's on offer at the NHS, but he's here to help support in terms of any of those other questions which might be cropping up today. So we're going to expect it to be kind of 45 minutes to an hour session, but any questions that you have, we'll aim to get through them today, so don't hold back. So this is a real quick overview in terms of the actual session today. So what we're going to do is, this is our third instalment. We've had a really great introduction in terms of the breadth of what's on offer at the NHS, moving into we went into nursing and midwifery last week, which was brilliant. We saw lots of people on that. And then today we're looking more at the kind of tech and IT side of things. But any questions you have more generally, then definitely do go ahead and ask them. And what we're going to do is then get a bit of an overview in terms of one other journey into the NHS, which is always great. We love seeing and hearing about different ways into the NHS and particular industries and particular roles. So this is another one today. And then finally, it's just that chance to ask any questions. But I could already see 2 questions come in, so I know that we're not holding back until that session at the end. So definitely go ahead and do that. So that's a really kind of brief overview in terms of the NHS and the session today. This diagram, I know we've seen this through the other sessions when we've spoken about the NHS, but it's just a reminder of how prevalent and how many options there are in terms of apprenticeships at the NHS, and IT and tech being definitely part of that. So that's what we're going to go into a bit more today. And in the same way that we did in the session last week, I've just highlighted a few of those examples that there's such a wide range of opportunities on offer, but there are highlighted a couple in here which relate to kind of our session today. And as you know, we have this presentation which we can share with any of you, and we can follow up with any of you if you see anything or you're not entirely sure whether there's a particular role which suits your skill sets and suits what you want to do, albeit it might not be the one which journey he's been through, but we can help support you through any of those. So we'll make sure to, we know we've circulated this presentation with the students who've been on the calls previously, but anyone who's on today's session will also get access to this, and we can help support you into any of those different roles. So those are from level 2 to level 6. So these are just some examples of kind of the tech and IT roles, which is just a reminder and takes you back to those other sessions we've had in the rest of the series as a top line overview. So what I think is probably the right time to do is, we've kind of reminded you why we're here, we've reminded you what the session's kind of in aid of, and I've kind of referred back to some of the sessions before. So really today we're lucky enough to be joined by someone who has actual experience in terms of tech and IT and a particular role at the moment, and can give us a bit more insight than maybe I can by going through those slides. So I'm going to hand over to someone who's a bit more experienced and does actually work in the NHS. So I wonder if now's an okay time, Roshane, to hand over to you, do a bit of an introduction to who you are and kind of what you do at the moment, if that's okay.
Yeah, definitely. So hello everyone, my name's Roshane Kwaku-Price. I am the Apprentice and Work Experience Coordinator at Moorfields Eye Hospital. Sorry you got to deal with me in this weird profile angle that I'm sitting in at the moment. I'm using my mobile rather than the laptop, so bear with me as we go through. So at the moment, I've been doing my role for just over 2 months. So very new, and we have a colleague on the line, Rob, who I've actually succeeded in doing the role. So can definitely give you a view on how I'm doing at the moment. But in terms of how I've got to this journey, I actually started probably in a similar position to a lot of you guys, where I was in sixth form and I didn't actually know what I wanted to do once I finished school. I didn't have a clear pathway in terms of my career. And I understood that university is definitely costly, and it's very costly if you don't know what you want to do in terms of your course. So I made the decision to do an apprenticeship instead. So I did an apprenticeship with HSBC, and that was as a data analyst for 18 months. And the biggest thing that it taught me is that you can get a career within IT without having those detailed bits of knowledge which you think you need before. I think a lot of us as young people, we see so many people in positions and think we need to study for so long and have to have so much experience before we can have an opportunity to get the roles. But in fact, an apprenticeship will allow you to earn on the job, and just as long as you're motivated and have some key fundamental skills, you'll be able to learn on your route. So that's the journey which I took, and that was with HSBC for 18 months. And since leaving there, I joined Moorfields Eye Hospital in 2017. So my position at Moorfields was, again, an apprenticeship. It was as an IT trainer. So now, rather than doing the data analyst side and being on the keyboard, it was now about giving back to staff and training them on IT systems. So that was very different. Again, I had to learn some new skills on the apprenticeship, but I was given loads of support. And my colleague Rob was on the line, gave me loads of tips and tricks on how to deliver as best as I could. And that's kind of how I got to where I am at the moment.
No, that's amazing. And I think that also that's really good, because I know there are some students on the line who are really interested in, not sure exactly which brand to go down. It shows that you don't have to take one direct route and you've gone through that different one, which is really interesting. I guess 2 questions just initially from me on those. What made you decide when you first ventured into the world of work then that you might go for the data analyst role, and how did you decide? So some of the students, they're kind of 17, 18 now and thinking, what apprenticeship should I go for? So how did you decide that?
So for me, it was probably in school. I loved IT classes, sitting behind the keyboard, working on spreadsheets, doing some PowerPoints, creating some websites. That was all big interest to me. So I knew I wanted to be in some sort of IT function. It was then just working out what areas, because IT is so big as a whole. But data analyst was one for me because I really like numbers and processing information. So I saw that the data analyst apprenticeship was available, and I didn't skip a beat in going for it.
Amazing. I think that's, and it just shows, like, so any of the students in that position right now is thinking about those things which energize you, and those things. So you say you enjoyed your IT lessons at school and things like that. That's a perfect example of how these students could be thinking about, oh yeah, no, I think that's for me, because those are the things during my day that I actually enjoy doing, and that comes across quite genuinely, as it's obviously your experiences. So that's great. I know that we've got a Q&A session at the end, but I can already see lots of relevant questions coming in from the students. So Regine, I'm just going to jump in here with some of the questions from the students. So this last one, I think, is most relevant to what you've just said. So from an anonymous attendee, which is great. What did you have to do as a data analyst?
So my day-to-day role, I worked within the customer relationship management team, which basically means we studied the online banking side of HSBC. So every day I'd need to generate reports, use some of our systems to download some data. It would then be converting all of those numbers and confusing data into like a summary that people could understand, that any other person in the organization would be able to pick up and know what's going on.
That's great. And then, so using that experience of yours from the previous role, if someone was on the line now and they're thinking, yeah, that really excites me, I'm interested in that, but I want to work for the NHS, is there the equivalent of kind of role they could be thinking about now? And how what role is that, I guess? Is there a data analyst role?
Definitely, we have loads of analyst roles within the NHS across all of our trusts. Again, it's quite a similar thing in terms of downloading information from the systems, providing it to senior management so they can interpret it from there. There's loads of roles that are going out now as apprenticeships as well. So again, you don't have to have the 5 years experience or the certain amount of skill sets. Providing you have some examples in your day-to-day life at the moment, we can get you onto an apprenticeship course.
Yeah, and to add to that, there's also a realm within the NHS called Health Informatics. So that's about analysing health data. So within each trust, so that's sort of data analytics, but in a slightly different way. So where every trust will have performance and information teams who monitor the NHS KPIs in terms of how they're doing on waiting times and referral times, things like that. There's also a branch that would look at the actual health data itself and looking at the effectiveness of treatment for certain sort of illnesses, or looking at patient pathways. So that there's lots and lots of data related roles in the NHS now.
Great. Yeah, no, definitely that's really interesting. And in terms of the students as well, so now if you're thinking I can relate to Roshane, I really enjoy my lessons and I could definitely see myself working for the NHS, and there's definitely a perfect role for you there. One question from me then, just before we move on to more of these which are flooding in. So what made you choose then the NHS after your initial kind of route into an apprenticeship, into a data analyst role? When did you think, right, I'm gonna move to the NHS, and why?
So for me, the journey to the NHS was a lot more personal in my case. So I grew up with a family that were always in the NHS. We always needed healthcare. So it was really nice to see the work which they were doing just to support our family and make sure that we're staying alive. So that appreciation which I had for them is why I just wanted to give back myself. The NHS is is the UK's largest employer. So you get to be in contact with so many different trusts. One of the biggest things which I've learned being in the NHS is that it's such a family aspect and vibe within every trust. Although you're doing your role, you have so much exposure to other members in the trust in different departments and organisations. So it's very good. It's very good. Great.
So you kind of thought, right, I found the right area or role that I'm interested in, but I want to apply these skills to somewhere that's closer to, your values.
Close to home, yeah.
Oh, great. And that makes complete sense. So that's great overview in terms of your journey and towards the NHS. So it gives us a good idea. Catherine, I don't know if we want to just open the floor up a little bit and get to some of those questions on this before moving on to the next slide.
Yeah, sure. No, definitely. I saw one that just came in. So while we're on the topic of, finding the right apprenticeship, someone has asked, how did you find the apprenticeship role within the NHS?
So I did it the, more traditional way of just opening the laptop and going on to NHS Jobs, as well as Indeed and other recruitment websites. Lucky enough, I saw that the apprenticeship was open. Most of our roles which we advertise, Rob, I'm sure we could say would have at least a minimum of a month, maybe a little less in terms of recruitment time. Am I saying that?
Yeah, I'd say so. Most trusts advertise on NHS Jobs anyway. So it's worth just keeping an eye on NHS Jobs, because different trusts will have different sort of recruitment timelines. Some might only open for a couple of weeks, so it's worth just keeping an eye. You can set some alerts. It's like any other job board. You can set alerts to get email notifications when roles come up that are relevant to you. The other thing that is sometimes worth doing is looking at training providers that work with the trusts to deliver those apprenticeships. So if you're looking for IT and tech ones, you can find some IT specialist training providers out there that deliver apprenticeships, and possibly register with them, because they might have access to vacancies through other employers that don't go onto NHS Jobs, either in the NHS or in the private sector. So if you're in London, some of the big ones in London are, you've got Just IT, you've got Arch Apprenticeships, you've got QA Apprenticeships. So there's a few IT specific apprenticeship providers who potentially are tapped into a number of sort of tech organisations that might be looking to recruit. So, unless if you're just openly looking for IT apprenticeships or IT opportunities and you're not overly concerned where that is, you're just looking for a route in, they might be worth speaking to. But other than that, NHS Jobs is the best place to find NHS apprenticeship opportunities, I'd say.
Okay, great. And really useful tips from Rob there in terms of, looking into those training providers as another angle, another route in. Speaking about, specifically to IT then, obviously, does IT within the NHS involve bioengineering?
No, so bioengineering is a different discipline. So bioengineering would fall under our healthcare science professions. So it's not classed as an IT career. So if you're interested specifically in bioengineering, it's worth looking at this National School for Healthcare Science, I believe, is the place you want to look. And there is a specific website that's been set up that I'll see if I can find, and I'll put it in the chat for whoever that was. And if I can find a web link, I'll share it now.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rob. And yeah, we've had another question around engineering apprenticeships, so hopefully that will be useful for the person that asked that as well. We've got one as a more overview of apprenticeships. So Roshane, it'd be interesting to hear your view. What are your views around degree apprenticeships?
I think degree apprenticeships are a great opportunity to deliver, well, I'd say to develop your career. If you do feel like university commitment isn't best in terms of you don't know what your correct pathway is, I think the degree apprenticeship is a good route, purely because you'll get the on-the-job learning as well. A lot of people that complete university, especially some of my friends, have said that they didn't feel that they had the same experience coming out from their qualifications. So being able to learn on the job and have exposure to the working environment, as well as completing your degrees, is a very valuable thing to do together. Yeah,
great. And obviously, I don't know, that was from an anonymous attendee, which is fine, but I guess, you know, whatever you are interested in, depending on the sector, just making sure, as Roshane said, you know, you've got to, I guess, look at what is right for you as well. But it's also good to hear from, you know, other people like yourself, you know, in the different industries to get some advice. So great question. Thank you. We've got quite a few more generalized around the apprenticeships. So I don't know if we want to come on to those later, Ellie?
Yeah, maybe, well, there's some good kind of starters in terms of questions, but what we kind of wanted to add in as well, which we're really best placed to get some good advice here, I think, from our panelists today, is we know that lots of our students on the line are, as you could tell from the poll at the beginning, really looking to apply, whether it's this year or next year. So Roshane, particularly in your role at the moment as well, what do you look for in terms of candidates, and kind of any top tips really, knowing, having gone through and been successful in the application process yourself when you did the apprenticeship, but also from your role currently, what is any advice you could give of things to kind of definitely do in the application process and maybe not do as well?
So I think one of the biggest tips which I got when I was doing my application process was to not underestimate some of the things which you've done at school. So when applying for jobs, a lot of people get very caught up on maybe work experience which they've had outside of their school. But just think about those examples which you've done in school, which are relevant to the questions being asked. And as long as you can frame your answer in a way which matches what the question is asking for, it will be valuable content for your application. A lot of the times I had a lot of scenarios where it was things which I've done in school projects, times where I've just been conversating with friends and teachers, but they were all different bits of skills which I could use in the application process.
Great, and I guess we've been doing some kind of interactive sessions with our students, trying to work through those scenarios. You don't have, and I'm obviously not interviewing you right now, but do you have any kind of ideas of any examples which you've heard, which you've been impressed with, or you might have used? I don't know, maybe it's a difficult question. Sorry to throw that in.
Really put me on the spot now, Ellie. Let's see. I'm just trying to think.
In the meantime, Rob has just put that in the chat box. So anyone who was asking around those engineering roles, then that's in the chat box. So you can copy and paste that one in.
I think so. Try to follow the STAR model, where you give a summary of a situation. So situation, the task, the achievement, and then the result. So one of the examples I could give was when I was in school, and my teacher was giving out a task for us to complete in Excel. but actually didn't know how to do one of the functions which he was trying to teach the rest of the class. So I took the step up of just explaining how to do it to the teacher and then cascading it to the rest of the class. And it then enabled all of us to learn. So in that example, for example, I've used my knowledge, I've applied it by communicating with the teacher and telling her how it should have been done. I was humble and didn't try to embarrass the teacher. I was trying to enable the rest of the class to get it done. And the outcome was we got our work done a lot quicker than it would have been if we'd been trying to look for the right answer.
Amazing. Yeah, so that's a perfect, like a great example which the students can think of, and then anyone who's on the line, you know, you can think about those examples of, you don't have to have done any particular NHS work experience, for example. That's not saying you need to have done that. It's saying that you can use the examples of things you've already done in your life and you're at school in kind of an interview process. So that's really helpful. Thanks, Roshane. And in terms of anything else that you're looking for when you see candidates come through, is there anything else on top of, obviously, yeah, be prepared and have really good research and examples of things in your life which you could use at school? Is there anything else you look for, or bits of advice you could give the students?
I mean, if you're interested in IT and it is one of your hobbies, please tell us as much of the things which you're doing outside of school, which is in relation to IT. If you're involved in any volunteering projects or you do some things on the side, like building your own websites, don't limit yourself to what you're just doing within school. It'd be great to know everything about you. Of course, there will be some mandatory things which might be part of the application process, like grades and maybe some other qualifications, but add in as much as you can on top of those minimum requirements.
Great. Yeah, no, definitely. And do we know what the actual, just for the students on the line who are interested in kind of the tech and IT roles, obviously they'll vary depending on what role they're applying for, but is there a general minimum grade which the students could be aware of, or does it really vary from role to role?
Rob, would you be a little bit best suited to that? From my perspective, I'd say it would be the GCSEs for both maths and English as a minimum across most of our apprenticeships. But I'm sure Rob will touch on it, that it varies across quite a lot of the roles.
Yeah, I mean, I've said this on other sort of sessions. The English and maths qualifications that you get are really, really important. While it isn't the end of the road if you don't achieve a 4 to 9 in your GCSEs, it just makes life a lot easier when you're looking at either applying to get onto an apprenticeship or actually doing the apprenticeship itself. It makes it a lot easier. In terms of other sort of experience or qualifications that you might need on entry, it will vary from course to course. So for some of the health related apprenticeships, you will need some sort of experience of providing care, whether that is something informal like caring for a ill or, you know, elderly parent or, you know, grandparent or aunt and uncle, or whether it's, you know, formally doing some sort of part-time work in a care home or a care agency. That will help as well. I guess when you're thinking about applying, you need to consider who else might be applying, because it's a competitive field. So whatever you feel you've done that can make you stand out ahead of other people, that is going to be the sort of stuff that you need to try to include on your application form, CV, whatever it may be.
Yeah, that's brilliant and really helpful. So I hope all the students have jotted these down. I know that there's a few points that we can follow up with you on, students, as a follow-up from today, but some really good advice there. And anything, sometimes more quite a difficult question as well, but anything you'd avoid, Roshane, or things that you kind of you'd recommend students to be aware of to avoid in the application process?
That's a very good question, actually. Probably something which you don't usually think of what not to do.
I mean, while Roshane's thinking, some common ones would be you go through your applications with a fine tooth comb once you've done it. Try and pick up any grammar or spelling errors, because I mean, you'll hear this probably from every sector, but it is one of those things that is a really easy thing to look at that people don't look at, and that trips them up. So that would be my first thought. Roshane's probably might have some more specifics.
No, I definitely agree with that, Rob. Another thing to do would be to make sure you are being truthful in all of your scenarios. Don't if you have done something but you haven't put it down, again, you should look to do that. But then vice versa, if you haven't done something which you are saying that you have, you might be tested on it. So just make sure you're being very truthful. That's one thing I'd say.
And I mean, as a tip, this isn't necessarily something coming directly from the NHS. This is probably my approach to writing an application. If you're going through an application process that is not CV based, if you're going through an actual application form or an online application form, then what you should be looking at doing in your personal statement, you should be answering all of the parts of the person specification that you've seen. So the way I treat a person specification as if they are asking questions rather than bullet points. So where it says experience of providing care for someone, I treat that as if they are saying, when have you provided care for someone? And then I answer very specifically with an example. So where you can give specific examples, that will really show that you've got that experience, rather than someone just saying, oh, I know how to care for an elderly person. They would prefer to see someone say, I cared for my granddad who had diabetes and needed help with his insulin injection, or whatever it may be. So try and be specific and give real examples.
That's great. Yeah, and I think that's a really good takeaway for all the students today. So that's new to me. Like, the way you approach that is like invaluable, knowing that the person on the other end of the application, whether it's Roshane or Rob, who is most likely, you know, or the equivalent, is looking for it like that. So treating it methodically when you're applying to going through the application processes like that is great. And then just one more question from me, because I know the students will have better, if not questions than I do. But in terms of the application process, then, Roshane, is it okay if you just give us an idea in terms of what a typical application process would be like, or what the students have to look out for when they start that journey, whether it's from your own experience applying for an apprenticeship or in your role now? Both very valuable.
Yeah, so as we said, it starts on NHS jobs, and as Rob was saying, it will usually be an application form where you'll be given a blank canvas, but then you have to match your answer to our job description, and there will be listed all the different responsibilities and criteria which you need to write in. I'd always say, before you even begin typing, study that job description as best as you can. Make sure you know every single point and what aspect of the role it fits into. As you're doing your application, you'll then send that forward to us. If you're successful and you meet the entry criteria, it will then move to an interview, or there might be another assessment for you to complete. If you're successful in your interview, which may also have an assessment, then you'll be offered the role. And then from there, we'll be looking at getting you inducted into the trust and starting in your role.
Amazing. No, thank you. That gives us a really good idea. Catherine, I don't know if you want to then jump into some of the questions coming in with the Q&A.
Yeah, sure, definitely. We've had a really interesting one from Sasha, and she asks, do they offer apprenticeships in using CT scanners and MRI machines and things like this to become a radiographer? Does it count as an IT apprenticeship or role, or is that under a different category?
Should I take this one, Shane?
And I was just about to say, but I think this will be tech.
Okay, so there are actually, it's funny because I'm currently doing a piece of work looking at radiography apprenticeships. So there are two types of radiography apprenticeships you can do. They're both degree apprenticeships. So you can either do a therapeutic radiographer apprenticeship or a diagnostic radiographer apprenticeship. So the one you're talking about there is the diagnostic radiographer. So it's the one who's, you know, doing the scans and then looking at the results of those scans and tests, and then providing some insight into forming a diagnosis. So yeah, there are two apprenticeships. They are not classed as IT apprenticeships, and they're also not healthcare science apprenticeships. So they are part of the allied health profession family. So they are an AHP apprenticeship. So I don't know. There is a website for information about allied health professions. If you go through the sort of generic Skills for Health website or the Health Careers website, you'll be able to find information about AHP apprenticeships. There are some healthcare science apprenticeships that are that look at sort of using imaging sort of tools. So you might find some apprenticeships related to using scanners and MRI machines, but it wouldn't make you a radiographer. So healthcare science, there would be options as well, but yeah, radiography is its own discipline.
Great, thanks, Rob. And really great question, Sasha. Well done. Yusuf has asked another good question. Can you earn a good annual salary as an apprenticeship on an apprenticeship scheme in the NHS? So I guess starting salary, Rob, perhaps another one for you. What does that look like then for an apprentice?
So it varies from trust to trust. So I guess the first thing to remember is that every NHS trust is its own employer. So people obviously see the NHS as a brand, but the NHS is almost like an umbrella of lots of individual employers. So it's almost like saying that when you go to a Subway, for example, what you're probably doing, although you're going to a Subway to order a sandwich, you could go to one in one town that's owned by one company, and you could go to another one in the next town along, and it's owned by a whole other company, different employers, but they all operate under the same banner of Subway. So each individual employer will approach it differently. Most of the London employers tend to pay an element of the national pay scheme, which is Agenda for Change. So, for example, North Central London, including Moorfields, where Rashane is based, they adopted a joint decision to pay Annex 21 of our Agenda for Change, which it basically means that we pay 70% of the top of the normal pay band. So for an apprentice starting an apprenticeship in North Central London with an NHS trust, you'd be looking at a starting salary of somewhere in the region of about £17,000 a year. But there are other trusts in more sort of further out. So if you look at somewhere like North East London, you might find trusts offering £250 a week. It really will depend on where you are and the sort of the decisions made locally.
That's great. Thanks, Rob. We've had another question, actually, which I think from Yusuf, which, Roshane, it'd be interesting to hear from you and if you can remember back to your interview. But he asked, what kind of questions do you ask in the interview? So, yeah, Roshane, what do you have any advice then on that question?
Yeah, so the type of questions which we ask are usually scenario-based. Again, just trying to get you to go through different scenarios and identify the problem, what you did to address it, what the achievement was, and then any sort of future outcomes. If I think back to my IT training interview, which Rob actually interviewed me on, one of the questions was, can you give me a time where you've had to support someone achieve a goal? And I think at that time, I hadn't been in my working career for too long. So I think I gave the example of when I was at school again, and I had to help one of my friends in his assignment. I had a bit more knowledge than he did. We spent some time just understanding where he was at, what he needed to do to go forward, if there's anything which I did which could have helped him. So yeah, it's just about thinking about those scenarios and then expanding on them during the interview.
That's great. And obviously, as you said earlier, using that STAR technique to help you. But I wonder, it's always good for students to ask questions. Can you remember any questions that perhaps you asked, or any questions that you think would, perhaps maybe sort of for Rob to answer, any questions that, if you were to hear from a student, how would it, by them asking a certain question, how would it make them stand out?
Okay. It's difficult because it depends on the people interviewing you. The way I normally approach it, if I'm going into an interview, I will ask a good sort of standard question. If you can't think of anything specific to ask, is things like, what development opportunities would there be for me? What sort of educational opportunities, questions that make it clear that you are keen on joining and staying with that organisation, because then a manager will automatically feel like if they appoint you, they're going to be able to grow you and develop you to stay with the organisation. You might look at, I mean, it depends on the role. You might want to ask questions about what plans the team have got for expanding, or whether they're looking to go into new areas of work. Yeah, it depends on the role, really. I guess you can build your questions from the job description. When you get to know that job description, have a think about what isn't in that job description, because they can't put everything in a job description, but often you'll find when you start a job, there'll be stuff that you're asked to do that you weren't expecting. So it's good to ask about what the future plans are for the team.
Okay,
and
great.
Rob, just to build on that as well, I also think about the questions to the trust or organisation that you're applying to. As much research as you can do, looking through their websites and other forums where you can find information, you will always have questions about what they do as a whole. So maybe think about questions which don't show you as naive, that you haven't done your research, but are maybe trying to develop your knowledge and understanding and interest into the organisation.
Great, some great advice there. Thank you both. There's a one from an anonymous attendee, and they say, are the opportunities for full-time employment the same for apprentices and graduates? So I guess, Rob.
So that's a very good question. So within the NHS, I would say we probably recruit more apprentices across the NHS than we do graduates, because apprentices is such a big area for us as the NHS. There are graduate schemes. So within the NHS, there's quite a well-regarded graduate scheme that recruits anywhere between 250 and 500 graduates a year for the whole country. But if you look at, so that's 500 graduates for the whole country. But then if you look at a NHS trust like Bart's Trust, for example, they probably recruit 500 apprentices a year just as a trust. So there are probably more opportunities for apprentices than graduates. It's I guess where it differs is the level. So graduates coming into the NHS would normally come in and start at a much higher level in terms of their role than apprentice would. But, you know, there's lots of statistics out there about, you know, apprentices tend to earn a lot more money in their lifetime than a graduate would. You also don't have the debt hanging over you because you won't have paid for a degree. So, yeah, an apprenticeship, although you might start in a role that's at a lower level than a graduate, generally speaking, you can build your way up into roles as quickly as them.
Okay, great, thanks.
I'm just gonna jump in with some questions here. So, Roshane, so can I get into an NHS IT apprenticeship with BTEC Applied Science and A-level Economics? Very specific, a good question. I don't know if we know that one.
I'm not going to promise to say you would be able to. So it would depend on the advertising scheme. However, a lot of the qualifications are transferable. So sometimes it may not be that they're looking for specifically a BTEC level 3 in IT. It may be that they're looking at the standard or level of level 3, and it might be transferable. I think that's the safest answer I can give on that.
That's very good, very diplomatic. And whoever that is, so I know it's coming anonymously, but you know how to get in touch with us. So if you do have any specific questions around where you are, and we can help you kind of work through that and see what the best options are for you. So do get in touch with us. Another kind of interview question, but a great question as well from one of the students. What's the best answer? So what are your best 3 characteristics in an interview? It's difficult because I guess it's really subjective, but are there any kind of themes which you think would be great in terms of characteristics for particularly maybe an IT or tech role?
This is very hard because I don't want to discriminate against certain groups if you don't have these characteristics.
Maybe one.
But
then.
From an IT, and maybe I'll say from a data analyst perspective, when I approached my interview, I would have been trying to explain how I was a problem solver, able to take in different accounts and be able to work out situations and solutions. You do also have to be quite a good communicator. because you'll probably have the knowledge, but if you're not able to communicate it in a way which makes sense to other people, it might hinder how well they receive the message. And I'm going to play it safe and only do those two. And if Rob wants to add another one, then he can.
So I guess my thinking, without wanting to sound like I'm repeating myself from earlier, have a look at the person specification, because often in a person specification, it will have a part of the person specification that actually asks for specific characteristics or values or behaviours. So if you look at those sort of elements of the person specification, if you then get that question in an interview, you've almost been given the answer already, because you know what they're looking for. If they say we're looking for someone who's got keen attention to detail, and then they ask you a question in the interview, what 3 characteristics can you bring, then you know, using that, putting in that you've got a keen attention to detail would be really helpful. So I would always, whenever you're going into an interview, make sure you remember that person specification and remember what you've written in your personal statement to answer that, because that's the other thing they will be checking to see if that is consistent, and to make sure that you're not telling porkies on your application form.
Great. We've Roshane, I wonder if you can remember what month of the year you applied for your NHS role.
So my initial apprenticeship, so I started in June 2017. I would have applied around April.
Okay, great. So a student has asked about what time of the year apprenticeships are advertised. So I guess then, well, as Rob had said earlier, you know, it's just about constantly checking weekly or so. Rob, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, this isn't necessarily going to be particularly helpful for anyone, but it will, again, vary by employer to employer. So a lot of trusts, so Moorfields, for example, we only ever recruited apprentices as and when we needed the staff. So it would be on an ad hoc basis as a role came up, whereas Great Ormond Street Hospital, for example, they recruit certain apprenticeships in cohorts. So for their business administration and their healthcare assistant apprenticeships, they recruit in 4 cohorts a year. So it really depends on what you're going for. If you're looking at, what I would say is, if you're looking at degree apprenticeships, generally speaking, you want to be looking, I would say, probably Christmas time for the following year, because a lot of employers who are recruiting for degree apprentices will want that confirmed by Easter. They try to get it all done by Easter so that they're not interfering with people's exams, especially outside of the NHS. If you're looking at some of the big corporate companies, I know the likes of PricewaterhouseCoopers, KPMG, they do all of their recruitment quite early in the year, in the academic year. But yeah, I would say for the NHS, for the most part, you're better off just keeping an eye regularly.
Great, thanks. And I guess in terms of apprenticeships, quite a good question here. Is there a set amount of people that are allocated the apprenticeship? So I guess it would depend on the role, but yes, Rob or Roshane, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends on the role. Sometimes it might be, as Rob said, a cohort of apprentices that are going forward. Other times it would just be one person. In my case, when I was recruited, it was just for one role within the trust. I think trying to work out the demand for the role. If you look into the trust which you're applying to, try to think based on their number of patients that they see. If they have data about their staff, try to work out how many you can expect to be going in competition with.
Yeah, and I guess, so if that question is asking, do we recruit a certain number of apprentices a year? So is it capped at 200 a year across the NHS? Then no, it wouldn't be. Yeah. I mean, actually, the numbers are expanding exponentially at the moment, because we are looking to recruit as many as we can across the whole country, really. So funny enough, I'm just looking at some data for the region that I cover, for example, and when you look at somewhere like Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, they recruited 5 apprentices in 2016-17, 229 apprentices in 2017-18, and then 373 apprentices in 2018-19. So the numbers are actually going up every year. So there isn't a cap. It will all be dependent on what the NHS trusts need in their workforce.
Yeah, of course, and that's great to see that it's growing. Thanks for that.
Sorry, just had one quick question. So I think it's nice, a one to ask, which is, I know you mentioned earlier, Rob, that yeah, there are these companies which are applying for maybe the tech and IT students who are maybe 17 or 18 now. They're looking to go down that career route. I guess my question would be, what's the reason that you two have chosen the NHS, and if you were sitting there in their position now, what's one thing which I guess you'd take as a takeaway from joining the webinar today, which is like, actually, yes, no, I think tech or IT at the NHS would be for me?
I'll let Rashane go first on the tech IT front, because he's got more of a tech IT background.
Yeah. So from my perspective, it's probably about how transferable the roles can be within the NHS. So if you look at me, for example, I joined as a IT trainer with information as a data analyst. So there's some crossover straight away, but that has allowed me to diversify and now move it deeper into HR and apprenticeships and go from there. So I think the key takeaway is that you won't be restricted to the role that you go for. There's going to be loads of opportunities for you to diversify and progress your career within the NHS. It's not just going to be limited to the role which you choose straight away.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, I'd echo that. One of the big selling points for me going into the NHS was about the opportunity, but for me it was also something about the values. So, you know, it's always important. You can look at lots of research. It's always important for the values of the organisation that you work at to reflect your own values. So if you are caring in nature and your value set is about, you know, looking after others and being supportive, then the NHS is a really good place to work. And every NHS trust has its own culture. So not all trusts are exactly the same, but the whole of the NHS is founded on common principles, which is about care. So, you know, even in trusts that have slightly different versions of that is the basis of why they exist. So I think, you know, for me, I actually joined, one of the reasons that I joined Moorfields was because I have a family member that is a patient at Moorfields. So I'd seen what Moorfields can do for people, and I really wanted to be part of that. And then moving to Health Education England has been more about how can I share my knowledge with more people and be more impactful. So I guess they're the takeaways, I would say.
No, I think that's really, really great answers, both of them, because I think it can be difficult when you're venturing into the world of trying to decide what might be right for you, and those things are things you can only hear directly from someone who works there, who's been through that experience. So that's why I was keen to ask that one, and some really nice points there. I'm conscious of time, Catherine. I know we can get through these last couple maybe, and then we'll do the wrap up at the end, but yeah, so just a couple more questions and then we'll just wrap up.
Sure. Chinmay asks, what are the work experience and career paths offered for medical physics routes?
Okay, so medical physics, again, is another healthcare science discipline. So if you go onto that link I shared, you'll be able to see some of the potential job roles. Work experience-wise, it will depend on the trust. I know that some trusts offer sort of a day in the life of a healthcare scientist, and that might give you some insight in that. You might not specifically get something in medical physics, but potentially you could get something generically in healthcare science, which would sort of give you an insight into that.
Okay, great. We have one final question here. Is it more likely that a female or a male will get the apprenticeship if they have the same qualifications? It's quite a tricky question there.
That is quite a controversial question, that one.
Very.
So
Yeah.
Okay, so the NHS, through NHS Jobs, all applications are anonymised. So when you are recruiting for someone through NHS Jobs, you don't get any personally identifiable data. So you don't even get a name, you don't get dates of birth, you don't get addresses. All you get is all of the sort of educational experience and the personal statement and work experience. So that is done specifically to try to cut down any sort of conscious or unconscious bias towards recruitment. All of the recruiting managers in the NHS are trained on unconscious bias. And what I mean by that is, so that is effectively recognizing where you as an individual might be looking for certain character traits that reflect yourself. So that is unconscious bias. So if you can recognize whether you are doing that, then you're more likely to be able to select people based on their actual skills and qualifications. Yeah. And I mean, even to the extent where the NHS are looking at how they write job descriptions now, because there's certain language that's used in job adverts that can potentially impact whether more males or more females apply for a role. So there's lots and lots of work looking at sort of that sort of female-male split. What I would say is that the NHS is staffed quite significantly more by female than males. So I think it's around 65% of the NHS are female.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, some challenging questions today. So, but well done everyone who's asked all the questions. It's been a good range as well. So that's really good to hear. Some people are interested in some really specific roles as well, which we might not necessarily have covered on today. So as I say, we can follow up with you directly, or if you do any questions on those, because obviously we're working really closely with Rob and his team to answer any questions anyone might have about going in any different particular route into the NHS. What we've got on the screen here is obviously just a kind of conclusions slide, and I've just popped in the chat box there. If anyone does want to write in their key takeaways or from today's session in the chat box, and it's always nice to hear. But we've had some absolutely brilliant advice. So thank you so much to Roshane and Rob first and foremost, really. It's been great, and we would really appreciate your time in terms of talking about your experiences, but also helping our students think about those application processes and what might be next for them. So thank you so much for that. In terms of a follow-up really from today's session, then those of you who are dialed in on your laptops, and you can see the screen in terms of the email address, which you can really write into if you have any specific questions or anything about any roles or anything you might not necessarily have wanted to ask about on the session today. Then do send us an email, pop your name in there and the fact you were on today's session, and we can follow up with you directly and really help give you that support into whatever route might be best for you. Also do follow us on Pathway CTM Instagram account. We've got a prize going, we've got a kind of competition going at the moment, so the fact you're on today's session means you are definitely in the running, so go ahead and join us on Instagram and don't miss any of our content on there. We will be sending through a recording of this session to anyone who's joined or anyone who's registered and was unable to make it today, so don't worry, you will be able to kind of refer back to it. But most of all, really, thank you so much for joining. We love the engagement, we love the fact that you're here every week, so well done, and thank you so much to our special guest for today. It's been great, so thanks for your time.
More than welcome. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.